And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Flying weather for Tuesday morning. Not too bad out here over the Bering Sea. A lot of VFR out there, increasing marginal VFR toward the west there. And then marginal VFR, northern Bering Sea and across the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta into portions of the Kuskokwim Valley, then northward to the western Arctic coast. And some IFR up here along the northwest coast, western Brooks Range. And then narrow band on down in toward Norton Bay and the Lotto Hills there. VFR, central interior, Bristol Bay, Kodiak Island, all the way up to the eastern Arctic coast. IFR, eastern interior, and marginal VFR south of that zone across the Copper River Basin into Prince William Sound, the North Gulf Coast, Matanuska Valley, Turnagain Arm to a certain extent, and down to Resurrection Bay, eastward there, right into the Panhandle, with IFR over toward the Canadian border. And that's about the same pattern for Tuesday afternoon for lowest conditions north and east of the Panhandle there, and marginal VFR elsewhere into the Gulf. VFR now into Prince William Sound and on up into the Susitna Valley, Cook Inlet down to Kodiak. IFR here over the eastern interior. Areas of IFR here again, Norton Bay up into the maybe the Kobuk Valley, more likely Selawik to Kotzebue northward there, into the southern slopes of the western mountains. VFR here along the southwest coast now into Bristol Bay looking pretty good. Little marginal VFR on the Bering Sea side of the Alaska Peninsula. Otherwise, pretty wide open there all the way to the eastern Aleutians. Marginal VFR, St. Lawrence Island, southward to Atka, westward to Shimia and Attu, and right on the edge there are the Pribilof Islands. Then for Wednesday morning, IFR across all the central and eastern Bering Sea, most of the Aleutians, western Alaska Peninsula. Otherwise, not too bad here for Bristol Bay. A little bit of marginal VFR along the mountains. Kodiak Island, VFR up into south central Alaska. Copper River Basin, though, east side there, looking at some IFR, also up over the mid-Tanana Valley, mid and upper Tanana Valley, and up to the northeast there. Couple areas of VFR or IFR out over the west there, and for the southeast coast, marginal VFR with IFR over toward the Canadian border. And for the afternoon, that pattern holds again, but now some VFR trying to show up there around Prince of Wales Island. Otherwise, not much change across the southeast coast. Not much change over the eastern Copper River Basin, but the west side there breaking out the VFR, including Prince William Sound, Matanuska-Susitna Valley, Alaska Range southward, across Cook Inlet, Kachemak Bay into Kodiak Island, and not too bad in the interior here. A lot of marginal VFR over the western and central part of the state out toward the west coast and the Bering Sea. North slope, marginal VFR with some VFR for the Brooks Range, mostly marginal for the Aleutians and the Bering Sea. Passes Anatuvik, look for marginal VFR for both those passes for the Brooks Range tomorrow. Lake Clark and Merrill, VFR. Rainy looks to be VFR right at this point in time, as does windy. Actually, could see some marginal VFR for Windy, Isabel, and Mentasta. Marginal VFR for Tuesday. And Tanita as well looks to be marginal VFR, especially on the eastern entrance. Portage starting out marginal, turning toward VFR as you get more of a westerly flow here, blowing that off to the east. And for Chilkoot and White, IFR. Freezing levels, the only thing out west here is at the surface here, right across the central Bering Sea, down across the Alaska Peninsula, 2,000 feet up along the North Gulf Coast, across the northern Panhandle there, 4,000 feet down toward the Queen Charlotte Islands. And icing, pretty good chance of some considerable moderate rime icing, most of the southeast coast here up into the North Gulf Coast as well, over toward Montague Island, another band here over the eastern interior, right across the Yukon River and also the Porcupine River up there into Canada, and building threats of some light icing there starting to appear along the western Arctic coast. And the jet stream here showing upper level low over the Chukchi Sea, so south-southwesterly 65 knots at 33,000 feet there. Otherwise, 85-knot winds coming westerlies. Take a turn to the south here at about 65 knots across eastern Aleutians. Strongest jet there, well to the south, actually across Vancouver Island into British Columbia. and down off the chart here over the Aleutians. But you can see a 100-knot Arctic jet as some very cold air starts to move out of the Russian Far East into the northwestern Bering Sea. And at 9,000 feet, that still shows up here, 70 to 90 knot winds coming around this low, slowly pulling eastward into the northwest Bering. And westerlies at about 40 knots, taking a turn to the south here, 65 knots right across the Alaska Peninsula and Kamishak Bay area. And down and around this low, coming back up from the south-southwest, 45 to 60 knots there across the northern panhandle, 3,000 feet. 50-knot winds out of the south, right into the southern or the central and south coast of the panhandle. More of a south-southeast wind there, 40 knots for Yakutat, Kodiak Island, kind of surrounded by strong northwest winds tomorrow, 45 to 65 knots. Lighter up over the interior. And out to the west with this cold air starting to pour into the northwestern Bering Sea. Look for 40 to 60 knot winds out of the west associated with that, but much lighter down over the Aleutians. Turbulence, maybe some light to isolated turbulence, St. Matthew Island. And for the out toward Erickson Air Force Base there for the western Aleutians, could be a little choppy, but nothing too bad. And moderate turbulence, pretty widespread here. Alaska Peninsula on the lee side of the Aleutian Range, Kodiak Island, south central Alaska, North Gulf Coast, all the way down across the Panhandle.